My name is Rebecca Smith, and this is the second half to my lesson plan. The first activity is really setting the scene. I really want my students to understand the need for proofs, and so to do that, I'm going to do a little bit of role playing. So when my students walk in, normally the procedure will be that I'll greet them, they'll go sit down at their desk, write the daily objective, but today it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have music playing that is warlike or something that sounds like that would be played on the battlefield. I'm going to have pictures of ships on my television, um, almost looking like they're about to invade. And I really want my students to feel like, hey, something's going on here. So they will go ahead, sit down, and write their daily objective, and as I'm greeting students. But as soon as class begins, I'm going to ask my students to close their eyes and imagine that they are a soldier in Queen Elizabeth's army, and Spain is about to invade. And so I'll have them close their eyes. I want them to be able to connect not only with the text but with history. I want them to connect and empathize with what those soldiers were feeling. Um, Here they are, Spain's about to invade, and they have a woman leading them. And so I'm going to ask them, I'm going to give them probing questions. I really want them to be thinking of how they would be feeling if they were a soldier. And then after some think time, I'm going to allow them to journal those thoughts down. I feel like this is an effective strategy because I'm a woman, and I think they would be able to kind of um, visually and just through the role playing technique think, how would I feel if someone was going to invade this classroom and Mrs. Smith was going to lead us in battle? uh, they might have some concerns, understandably. So they're going to journal those thoughts down. Again, this is establishing the need for Queen Elizabeth to use rhetoric and use artistic proofs to appeal to their logic, their emotions, and the credibility of who she is, that she can lead them in a victorious battle. So I'm establishing the need in the first activity. After my students journal, then I will enthusiastically read the speech as if I am Queen Elizabeth. For this second activity, I will have my students write down important vocabulary words. These are going to be words that are from the objective, words that they will, the literary devices that they will be using that day, such as artistic proofs and logos, pathos, and ethos, and commentary, and then also words that they will come across in the text. At this point, I'm going to define what artistic proofs are, why they're needed, how we can identify them. I will really just try to make sure that they understand what artistic proofs are by using examples for clarification, and I'll be also checking that they understand, just by reading their body language, and even sometimes maybe asking them to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Just so I know that they're prepared for the rest of the lesson. So then I'll explain to my students that we will be identifying and providing commentary on artistic proofs, and we'll be doing so by using the speech that I just read. And so they will hopefully already understand the need for artistic proofs. I'll also explain to my students that this is a skill that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. They're going to need to know how to identify artistic proofs, how to analyze them, and also how to use them in their own writing. And, there will be several assignments that they will be using in my class. There will also be future tests. But again, it's a life skill that they will need as well, and I'll try to explain the importance of that. For the second activity, I will be modeling, And during this time, I will be doing exactly what I expect them to do in guided practice, independent practice, homework, and even future tests. I will really try to make my students understand I need you to pay attention during this time because this is exactly what I want you to do. So this speech is nice because it's like 15 lines long. So for the first 5 lines of the speech, I will show students how to identify artistic proofs. I'll use highlighters, and I'll use 3 different highlighters, 3 different colored highlighters. One color for the pathos, one color for ethos, and so on. And so it'll be a really quick visual tool that they can see what things are. And then I'll also show them how to classify them into groups by doing that as well. But if the students are having trouble like immediately classifying, I can also show them how to just identify them all by either underlining them or highlighting them with one color, and then also classifying them into different categories, after they first label them. So I'll show them kind of 2 methods to that. The other thing is that I will be thinking aloud during this entire time. I want them to see how I, observe my thought process, especially when it comes to the connections. I want my students to see how I connect to it so they can begin to think that way. I will also show them how to write brief notes of commentary. And I'm also going to allow my students to, when they're in guided practice and even independent practice, I'm going to allow my students to, even make connections through drawings if they choose. And so I may even give them an example of what that would look like as well. The next activity is guided practice, and my students will pair up, and I want them to do exactly what I have modeled. So I really want them to mirror me. So again, they're going to be labeling, classifying, and providing commentary. During this time, I will be going around and I'll be, you know, quietly asking partners to elaborate their thinking. I'll also just be reading and seeing if they're on track. And again, I will allow my students to make connections through drawing, just because at this point, with the skill I'm concerned about is the connections are being made, and so they can make those connections through drawing. So the next activity will be independent practice. Again, they are going to do the exact same thing we've been doing the entire class, just this time they will use the last 5 lines of the speech, and they will do it on their own. For closing, I'll ask my students to share their findings, and I want to highlight some of the strong connections that I observed while I was walking around during guided and independent practice. I also want my students to go back to the beginning of the lesson, look back at their journal activity that they wrote at the beginning of class, and I want them to see how their trust in Queen Elizabeth at the beginning of class was and how it is now. Did she convince them? And I want them to kind of even, at this point they're almost evaluating her artistic proofs, but I want them to tell me, did she do a good job? Are they convinced? And we can, discuss this. And, if we have time, I only have 40 to 45 minutes in a class time, but if we do have time, I want to ask students and maybe just get them to think, how could they use artistic proofs in their own lives, especially the future. Part of my formative assessment will take place during instruction. I'll be walking around and just making sure that my students are making those connections, and also during the discussion that takes place at the end. I will also use homework as a formative assessment, and I will provide my students with a different passage, and they can use the same skills that they learned in class and transfer those to different passage, and I'll be able to give them feedback on that. The reason that I've chosen the activities that I've chosen is to move up Bloom's taxonomy. At the end of the year, I want my students to be able to write argumentative essays using proofs. I want them to be able to analyze texts in depth and be able to analyze the rhetoric of different texts. So to be able to create and evaluate, my students first need to have knowledge and comprehension. So I'm using this as a foundational lesson for my students to be able to recognize artistic proofs and make connections with them and explain them. I will evaluate my students' learning by, during instruction, again, I will be walking around and just making sure they grasp what I'm teaching. Also during the wrap-up class discussion. And I will also evaluate their learning through the homework practice that they will be doing. The reason that I've chosen this approach for evaluation is because it allows me to see that my students can identify artistic proofs and provide commentary on them. Again, it goes back to that objective. What they will be doing is exactly what the skill that I want them to obtain. It also allows me to see that they, especially with a different passage, it allows me to see that they can transfer this knowledge to other passages. And that's important for me because, especially with their homework, I can give them feedback and I can see, do I need to clarify something to the class or as an individual or to an individual? And this is so important because they will be asked to analyze passages in the future. They will be asked to analyze passages not only in my class, but on state assessments, on pretty much in every other class that they are involved in college and so forth. Again, these are life skills that they're learning. So it's really important to me that this is something that, I strongly evaluate so they are able to receive the feedback they need, not only to be successful in my class, but in the future. So that concludes my lesson plan, sections 4 through 6. Thank you.